Hi, welcome to episode 49 of Strong and Petty here in the beautiful Heavenly Iron Age gym here in the west end of Winnipeg, Manitoba. You'll notice that next to me I have a much more muscular, clearly just visibly more intelligent person next to me than I normally do.
Smaller.
Smaller? Technically smaller, but more muscular though. in Michael Thrones. Thanks for being here, Mike. Appreciate it, man.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here.
So Mike is a guy who, for anybody who's not aware of him, I don't know. It's weird that I just called you Mike because I never called you that. It's always Thrones.
Unusual.
It's always Thrones, which is also not his last name. It's actually Tronus, but phonetics.
It is beautiful to be alive. If you can't do that,
it's not something that you can just make up about yourself. You have to be able to show that you are as strong as you say you are. Especially if you're competing in strongman.
Thrones is a guy who's very integral to our gym around here. He's our powerlifting coach. He also dabbles in strongman coaching as well too. He's done that in the past too, very successfully, I might add.
When asked, yeah, inadvertently.
When asked to. He is Kelsey's coach. Kelsey just changed her last name. What's her new last name?
Showing back to her maiden name, Kostyniuk.
Kostyniuk, thank you. Who was Manitoba's strongest woman. Went from a novice competition to competing in Canada's strongest woman in Canada, excuse me. So knows what he's doing there. Is currently training Manitoba's strongest junior, but I would say creeping up into much bigger picture than that, I would say.
Yeah, he's. I think if he puts a good meet together, he would be the strongest powerlifter in Manitoba history.
Tremendous. Ladanian Tyrell. And also a very good powerlifter in your own right, too. One of the top powerlifters in Manitoba right now. I think you would agree with that, right?
Yeah.
Purely by the numbers. I know it's very important to you.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, always by the numbers, especially my weight classes don't tend to be not my brief stint down to 93 that recently happened, but my typical weight class in the 105s.
Right.
I don't have competition there, which isn't. I'm not saying that about me being that good. It's that it's just not a very popular weight class here in Manitoba. But on the national scene, it is one of the better weight classes. But yeah, so I can only use the numbers, the coefficients to base that off.
Which is interesting because I think for the people who are from the strongman background with our show here and our listeners, 105 is a very densely populated category. There's fewer, obviously, but that's a really hotbed for really good competitive athletes, and even in Manitoba too, and looking nationally, internationally, and everything else too.
Yeah, at nationals, there's only 2 less 105s in the opens.
Yeah, it was
huge.
It's a super densely packed group. Also, Thrones is as far as a competitor goes, like we said, he's a very very accomplished powerlifter and searching for that next big deadlift always. What's the number on the horizon for you?
So it depends on kind of how a couple other seasons go this year, or I should say years, because we don't really have seasons in powerlifting. I want to get the heaviest drug-tested deadlift in Manitoba history. It is the heaviest powerlifting deadlift, but it's Chris Godin. He could be competing at the WRPF show in June. I know you and Dan really want to show up and support WRPF, but is also right. They're changing the date.
Yes,
it'll be announced by the time this comes out, I think.
Yes, please keep your eyes peeled for the WRPF meet. We're very excited for people who are coming in and doing new stuff. We'll get to that a little bit later more. But
yeah, and I know you and Dan really want to support the WRPF coming in, offering that avenue to lifters, having engaging, more exciting meets.
Right.
But so, I don't know how this is going to look by the time later in the year when I finish. I gotta build back up. Like I said, I took a short stint down to 93, and I gotta build back up into the 105s before I take a run at this. But I do really want to get the heaviest, at least drug tested deadlift record in Manitoba, regardless of weight class. Potentially go for just the heaviest in powerlifting competition all time. But like I said, it'll depend on the competitive landscape. Andrew Langlar.
Came out of nowhere all of a sudden. Yeah.
He looks like he could easily take Ben Down's numbers, maybe even just with a meet. He pulled at 735 on an axle. That's only 20 pounds under what Ben Downs did.
And for anybody who's not familiar, I think most of our listeners have probably deadlifted with an axle before, but if you haven't, it's very, very different than even a power bar. It's just everything rises at exactly the same time. I'm not sure if everybody, maybe some of the novice competitors or the the beginner competitors don't really understand exactly why an axle is so hard. It sits a little bit further out in front of you, obviously, with the diameter of the bar, but also everything just lifts at exactly the same moment. There's no give in the bar whatsoever. Yeah, watching Andrew hit that you said 735, right?
735,
yeah, that's nuts. And that's like a guy who's not used to deadlifting with an axle. So that's a guy who's just good at deadlifting. Like he's just getting it.
And like not that hard. Like that looked probably pretty comparable to a 727 in comp.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
So he looks like he could take that, and he's planning on competing before me because he's doing nationals. And I maybe will have filled out the weight class again by then. I still have like 21 pounds that I need to gain.
Of just raw muscle.
that'd be ideal. I don't think that's gonna happen. As much muscle as I can, obviously. Yeah. But and then I'm looking to. I hate training during the summer. It always goes shitty.
You're not a guy you don't do well with the heat, hey?
No, I'm awful.
Yeah.
And so what I would like to do is finish gaining the weight by September, and then in September launch into my meet prep for. Maybe movement if they're doing that in October again. That was really fun.
Yeah.
Hopefully they have more seating this time. But other than that, it was a good meet.
Yeah.
And or potentially they do the total fortification in December every year now. So
yeah.
One of those, depending on basically whether I think I can beat probably whatever Andrew hits in September.
Yeah, very likely. Andrew's a guy that I'm very excited to see what he can do with his strongman and his powerlifting stuff too. Yeah, just a guy who's gonna be really exciting to watch for the next year, 2 years, however long he chooses to pursue the strongman stuff. He says he wants to get his pro card.
Yeah, absolutely, he can.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like a crazy thing to me. I said this to you before in the gym that it's like every year it's getting harder and harder to get that pro card. I think like it's just like the avenues are getting so much more narrow with like the competitors getting better and like the pros are like there's the way that I got it, which was podiuming at Westerns and beating the right amount of pros. I don't see that happening for many AMs anymore. Nobody who jumps to mind, at least. Maybe there's somebody who comes out of nowhere and it's like, who the fuck was that guy? But man, the idea of beating
Mitch Hooper actually gets his pro card officially.
He finally earns his pro card, his pro status on the Canadian circuit. But the idea of beating like Tristan, Jeffers, Colton, me, Dan, like these guys, it's just like it's really hard to imagine some guy coming out of nowhere and just doing that. But I mean, shit, Andrew's hitting numbers that are right up there with some of those guys can do. So you never know. The right competition comes along, the right mix-up of guys, the right events. Stranger things have certainly happened.
Yeah, and he's certainly built for it. He's extremely coachable. Obviously, just stupid strong.
Yeah.
And like he has the explosiveness. He's played a bunch of other sports.
He's like a lifelong athlete. He said his brother's like an Olympic speed skater, so obviously he has like the background to be willing to push himself in that way. You know what I mean? Like it's in his blood, I guess.
Yeah, it's like if you wanted to design a strongman, it would look pretty much like Andrew.
It would look a lot like him too, and it also doesn't hurt that he's like a nice guy and people want to work with him and help him out and stuff too. Absolutely. I think that goes a long way too. So we know you're a powerlifter. You've done strongman too. You've done a novice strongman competition last year. Yeah. You won.
Yeah,
congratulations.
It was a later show that definitely played in my favor. I'm quick.
Yeah, but that's what you. But then really, watching you train for that one was something that guys could probably stand to learn from, which was you knew exactly what you needed to do to win events. Which was it's not heavy. You got to be fast. So you weren't training heavy for it. You weren't doing like super maximal weights in terms of what the competition was calling for. You were doing light runs with the yoke extremely fast. You were doing very, very high volume stuff, high rep sets with the log and stuff, and getting yourself set up so that you could handle. Because what you basically had to do was, I have to go for this entire minute, and I have to fit in as much as I possibly can inside of that minute, which is what a few guys are going to deal with in this novice competition too. Like speaking of guys like Andrew and Ladanian and stuff, is that it's not going to be who can get the most reps, and then at 35 seconds will be who gets 6 and who gets 7. It's going to be who gets as many reps in a rep a second would be ideal for these guys. You know what I mean? So it's an interesting kind of thing, but that's exactly what you had last season.
Yeah, and it is quite nuanced, but I think it's going to start being like more common, just having a strategic plan going into every single event as people get clustered together, as the sport just becomes more competitive.
Yeah.
One example, obviously it was just due to the high rep nature, but with the car deadlift, because it was a side handle, you can put your knees forward, get your quads really engaged in the movement. In powerlifting, I deadlift sumo in competition, and so like that kind of knees forward, loading up your quads is a bit more of a natural, stronger deadlift position for me. But I found that my quads fatigued,
right?
Really, really, really soon. Like only with like 8 reps, And so what the strategy that I ended up implementing was do 5 reps heavily loading into my quads, and then do 5 reps stiff leg, and my quads can recover. And then I just switched back and forth, 5 reps loading in my quads, 5 reps stiff leg, and the stiff leg reps were slower, so I was losing a little bit of time, but I never had to take a break.
You guys write that shit down? This is the kind of stuff that he thinks like this is why I say this all the time to people on here, and I'm not sure they really like fully grasp what I mean when I say it, that like you have to be, at least as far as people that I've met, like the most like analytical person when it comes to like programming, training. Like nothing you do is without like a reason or like a very intense thought process behind it. I think you'd agree with that.
Yeah, and that's one thing. Like, so I teach labs at the U of M, and the lab that I teach during the winter, it's actually called I'm blanking on the name. Principles of Fitness.
Right.
In the lecture they're learning about like essentially how do you write programs. It's like extremely general because it covers every like physical quality, like aerobic training, power training, resistance training. So like you could have a full semester course on each of those, obviously.
Right.
But yeah, it's one of the things that I tell the students, because they're learning how to write programs. They're going to be going in the labs. They're going to be taking each other through programs. And I say like my time spent as a personal trainer in a big commercial gym, not my number one pet peeve. We'll get into that eventually. But my number 2 was always just trainers who get clients to do hard work for the sake of doing hard work.
Right.
Like I've never met anybody who goes to the gym just to do something difficult in their day. Except for maybe Grizzly, I guess.
Yeah.
For the difficult.
Who is a man that I guess I could be meeting this weekend at the Arnolds. We'll see. I will if I bump into him somewhere.
Yeah,
but
you gotta get a picture of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Get dwarfed by him.
But yeah, so like everyone has a goal. So nobody wants to go to the gym just to do something hard. If what you're doing isn't driving somebody towards the goal, it's a waste of their time. It's a waste of your time to sit there and count their reps while they do it.
Right.
And like ultimately they're paying for your time. So I tell my students I equate that to just stealing money if you're doing that.
Yeah, that's reasonable.
So it all stems from that. Like if I want to be able to provide the best possible outcome, everything needs to be driving towards whatever that client's goals are.
I think that's like something you see a lot too, is that, and I've had to explain that to say some of especially the women who come in to say like a boot camp, quote unquote. Like I don't really care for that term, but everyone knows what that means. Our women's group, we call it. I tell them beforehand that like not every session are you gonna, almost none of the sessions will you be like dragging yourself out of here a big sweaty fucking mess. Really, like it's not the end. The end game is not to make you sweat. I can very, very easily make you sweat. I can very, very easily make you sore and uncomfortable and not want to go to work the next day. But that's not going to be. Why would I do that? What's like? Explain to me why you want that, and then I can give you that if it makes sense, But I think a lot of trainers, there's nobody I'm thinking of specifically right now, but there's a lot of trainers who specifically search for that. Like this person has to feel like they got hit by a car when they leave here, which is a method, I guess, but not one that you subscribe to or I do.
Yeah, and I will say I sympathize with it, even from the trainee perspective. Like I love lifting.
Sure.
People kind of view like because I'm a researcher. I'm doing my master's right now, and
Master's in what?
Master's in kinesiology. Specifically, I research muscle physiology, and even more specifically, I research creatine supplementation and blood flow restricted training.
Thank you.
Which I'm sure we'll probably end up getting more in depth on.
For sure.
Both, I think, interesting topics. Like creatine is the most used supplement, except for protein.
Right.
And for good reason. So like we can obviously talk about that. But yeah, like the oh shoot, I forgot what originally made me think of bringing that up. I distracted myself. Then I was like, oh, he's gonna ask me questions on creatine, isn't he?
Right. Okay. Well, what I want to get into a little bit was we were talking about
the analytical approach.
Yes.
Sorry, it just took me a second.
This is a very normal conversation for us, by the way, too, where we start talking about interpreting him teaching me how to better interpret research or something, and all of a sudden we're talking about something completely different 20 minutes later. So
yeah, so it is, part of the perspective of, I would say, like generally the more hardcore community of like, there's the researchers and then there's the guys in the trenches, right?
Right.
And I think less and less, and maybe historically that has been the case. Less and less, I think there is the separation there.
Yeah.
A lot of people putting out the really good research right now, guys like Milo Wolf, Dr. Pack, Brad Schoenfeld, and like everybody that comes out of his lab, because he has a master's program, and I think maybe he's starting a PhD program. Like all of those researchers that are being trained, like Brad Schoenfeld's competed in bodybuilding. Milo Wolf has competed in bodybuilding. Dr. Pack is a powerlifter and a bodybuilder.
And a good one too, like a good powerlifter.
Yeah, he's like has a 280 or 290 kilo deadlift. So he's like in the 600s, like fairly well into the 600s. That's the type of people that are conducting research now. And, they're people who, they like to get after it. They like to train hard. And when I was young, I was just all about like train as hard as you possibly can.
Right.
I was coming from like a track and field 400-meter background, which is like the worst race you can possibly run. Although I say the 800 is worse. But then 800 guys say the 400 is worse. So I guess
the battle rages on.
Yeah. Everyone's conceding.
Yeah.
It's Canadian standoff.
Yeah.
No, you have it harder. You have it harder. So I totally get that. But when me and my brother, we got into powerlifting at the same time. And he was tracking his volume, his weekly volume on each lift. And I remember I was like, man, you're overcomplicating this shit.
Wow, how times have changed.
I was like, if I do more than last week, I'm good.
Then you're good. That's funny. It's actually really hard to imagine Thrones with that mindset. I want to get a little bit more into like the specifics of that kind of stuff, because even like I say that when I said we were having you on the show, I say that I sit and talk to you about a lot of stuff, and I always feel like I should be like paying you. I get so much information out of it, and the idea of like finding a balance between training hard. Obviously, we want to train hard. Like we said, we would feel a little bit inadequate, I think, if we came in here and just did the very bare minimum or whatever, right? But finding that balance between training hard when it's appropriate, and then also not killing yourself, and also not like mentally beating yourself up too badly if you don't have a day that goes the way you want it to. Like I'm very much a victim of my own mentality, where it's like, well, I look back and this time last year I was hitting 330 for a triple on the log, so I better at least hit 335 for a triple today. Otherwise, I'm a fucking bitch, and I've gotten weaker over the year, and I should probably just quit. And that's what goes through my head, and all of a sudden I have it. Then if I don't have exactly the day that I was having, where I hit 330 for a triple or whatever last year, then I'm like, oh, this has all been a waste. This whole year has been a fucking waste of my time, and I haven't gotten any stronger and whatever. And I'm happy to find out that's not necessarily the case. That's not entirely true.
Yeah, I think like recently we've been talking a lot about RP, and because I use velocity tracking in my training, so we've been talking about that too. And like, I think I was really lucky in that my first two influences in powerlifting coaching, because my brother and I, we never did cookie cutters. We just, when we were getting into it, he was the one that found both of these. I don't know how he stumbled on them, but
he's a guy who likes to look into stuff though.
Yeah, absolutely. And he was like, when he can become like really fixated on the topic.
Mm-hmm.
So when it was new to both of us, like my track career went a little bit longer than his did. Just he had an injury, decided to just take a year off from the track team. It technically was like a red shirt, which means that you can still train with a track team, but you don't lose a year of eligibility. We didn't need the extra year anyway, but
right.
Yeah, and so during that time, he was injured, couldn't run, and so we liked powerlifting, we liked Olympic weightlifting, and he started writing his own programs. And for both of us, our first two influences were Boris Shako and Mike Tashir.
Right.
Which, like, if you're a brand new lifter and like you're just trying to figure out like, okay, what's with this whole powerlifting thing? Like, there aren't two better people.
No, yeah, I was gonna say those are pretty deep dives too for early that on. Like,
yeah,
to find guys like that,
especially back in like 2014.
Right.
Maybe it benefited because it was back in 2014. There was less content to sift through. Right?
True. Yeah. True enough.
But yeah, so right from the bat, we were basically doing a Shako style program where you go squat, bench, squat, or deadlift, bench, deadlift in one workout.
Right.
and we were doing everything where it was RPE based. So right off the bat, we weren't part of that every set you need to be killing yourself.
Right.
But it was also such high volumes. By the end of the workout, you're dragging yourself out of the gym.
Right.
Right.
And you're learning to hone that RPE skill very early too, which is good.
Very early, yeah. And like we were still doing like back off sets. Almost every single back off set or accessory was rate to failure. So like I think it can be a bit of a challenge for people who have always had that like the hardcore mentality to accept that like maybe it is best to not kill yourself every session. And you know, if you're having a bad session, maybe it's maybe the best case scenario is you do, you know, 10 pounds less or a couple reps less, and then the next week that week where you took it back a bit acted like a mini deload, and your performance is even better. You don't need to take the full week off or anything, but you know, it's taking what's there is really at the heart of it. When you're having a good session, take advantage, go above and beyond, hit a PR if it's there, and if you're having a bad session, pull back, don't induce unnecessary fatigue, and don't beat yourself up about it.
I think take what's there is probably like the simplest and also the best way to sort of like illustrate what you're saying, where it's like if it's not there, you can't take it. You know what I mean? Like it's if you can try and you can grasp at straws, you can try to get every last bit of it, but if it's not there, it's just not going to be there. And that's for a lot of my strongman guys. I know that we all want to be like the hardest worker in the room, whatever that bullshit, but not always the smartest move. And we've seen guys I know a lot of guys who've cut short really promising careers and stuff because they just couldn't take their foot off the gas, and they just injured themselves, and they kept injuring themselves, and it's just not a smart way to be. It's a cool way to think of yourself as being like the fucking tough guy, hard worker, everything like that, and everyone wants to be that, and you can still be that, but just having some nuance to it, I think, is pretty helpful.
And I think it's more natural in strongman too, like being able to walk into an event where you're like, all right, this is going to be 75 seconds where, you know, I need to deadlift 550 for as many times as I can possibly get it to my hips. Like, you know, that's, you need a certain attitude and a certain approach
for sure
to really be successful in that type of environment. And, you know, if for some people that can be hard to dissociate between competition and training. Like,
right.
I think that's also a skill that it does benefit strong men to learn, but you have to be able to go to that place and push that hard,
right, just
as like a default necessity to be successful.
Well, let me ask you a question then. So, because I think you'd agree with me that like we see a lot, probably too much, of like crazy hype ups in the gym before gym lifts, smelling salts, that kind of stuff, where it's when it doesn't really matter. Like it's like this isn't like a make or break deal like say a competition would be. So, do you think there's a time and a place to start kind of like introducing that mentality before a competition to make sure it's there on game day, or is that like you have your game face, you have your war face, and you save it for game day?
I do know that there are coaches in powerlifting who prescribe hype, like on a 1 to 10 scale, essentially similar to RP, but it doesn't necessarily like you can be really hyped for, you know, an opener, right? You can be 10 out of 10 hype, but have the top single be an opener.
Right.
I prefer to like let the lifter self-regulate. For that, I do think that it is good to work on those skills, and where I think it matters the most is you have to be able to return to your baseline. If you're constantly agitated, at like even like in between events and stuff, you're just gonna burn yourself out mentally. And I think too, it ruins the fun of competing a lot.
Right.
Like hyping yourself up does make lifting more fun. I don't tend to get anything out of it, so I don't do it. And
you're a very mellow guy when you lift.
Yeah. But like a lot of people, that's part of lifting. That's part of what makes it exciting. It is the hype up, is the pre-lift routine. But you got to be able to bring yourself back down, because if you're always staying in that like it's a high stress mental state. It doesn't feel like it because, you know, it's
fun to be
a positive stress, right? But that is time that you're not recovering, right? The longer you stay there. So I think like that plays into that dissociating. Like you can go there when it's needed, but you can pull back when it's not. And I think the better you get at that, the less you need to do it in training. But then also, if you get really good at it, if you want to do it every once in a while when training, then it's not really going to affect too much. But it just I like everything being consistent. So yeah, I would keep that to maybe the last 2-3 weeks of training. I would say when things are or of heavy training, when things are getting their heaviest, and yeah, maybe it could even be used as an opportunity to work on those skills too.
Interesting.
Depends on the athlete that you're working with, right?
Right, and that's because I was going to say that too, because you said that you like to kind of let the athlete self-regulate a little bit. When do you feel like, or I mean, like maybe you've never really experienced it yourself, but would there be a point where you'd be like, all right, I got to step in and tell this person they got to settle down before lifts, like they're just doing too much, like it's not helping them?
I think like if it's really hard to say because I don't see this too much anymore. I think it was much more common back in the older days of powerlifting, the equipped guys, the West Side type guys, where you hear the stories of them already getting into like fist fights over who took their squat rack before they even started warming up.
Right.
That's just a high like agitation environment, right? You're always going to be on edge in a place like that, and I don't think that's conducive. But like I don't think that's like that level of arousal just as kind of background noise is all that common anymore. And maybe that's just because MPA and IPF meets are so boring. Like it's hard to stay that hyped.
I think that might be maybe the opposite could be true for some people too, where it's like, I've done really, really long competitions, say, and then you have to get yourself up for essentially a minute over the course of sometimes like 8 hours, 4 or 5 times, and that's fucking hard to do. And it's kind of the same thing with a powerlifting meet too, where there's so much time where you're sitting there doing nothing, and you got to you have to maintain a certain level of like being connected to your day. You know what I mean? Like being connected to what you're trying to do, while at the same time not letting yourself get like sitting there fucking vibrating and waiting for your next thing. But that would be a bit of a struggle, I think, for myself personally, for like say an IPF or MPA meet, whatever, is that there's just a lot of downtime. And even when you're there, I mean, I compare it to strongman, right? Because that's what I do. But when they say your name, from the moment you're there to the moment you finish your lift, people are fucking yelling, and you hear like very big strongman voices, your other competitors yelling at you and stuff. Whereas an MPA meet, it can be very, very quiet all the way through to the lift, and sometimes you get an applause at the end, and you know what I mean. Like it's just a very weird experience for me, where I think I kind of freak out a little bit. Honestly, I have to get used to it at least.
Yeah, I think that's where one of the keys there is being the biggest deadlifter, because everyone will stand up for the last deadlift of the day.
True. Yeah.
So, and deadlift is the one movement where I do get a little bit hyped, like probably like relative to the other lifters is probably like the level that they're at for their opener.
Right.
But like, yeah, I do hype myself up a little bit for deadlifts. With squat and bench, I used to hype myself up all the time. I never trained like that. I never have. And I would always miss lifts all the time.
I found the same thing with log for myself, is that if I try to get myself too like fucking buzzing in the room, everything's fucking going crazy, whatever, it's too technical of a lift for me to be able to get that far removed from it. Like I have to be a little more there and focused, and I can't just be like just angry at it. That just doesn't work the same way as maybe like with a deadlift or something,
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, I don't see too much nowadays where lifters are having issues with like calming themselves down. Maybe like, I mean, at the end of the meet, but
sure. But you're excited. It's over. You're done at that point. Yeah, you've done what you needed to do. So what I said earlier was that we have a tendency to start with one thing and then move on to something else. So that was your strongman career.
Yeah,
that was your novice strongman competition that you did.
And Vita. And Manitoba Strongest Man too, actually.
That's true. You did Manitoba Strongest Man. I forgot. I'm sorry. I almost forgot about that. We're 25 minutes in, and we discussed the one novice competition that you've done, kind of. So you did Manitoba Strongest Man too. So you've had a little bit of a strongman career. You're one of the guys that I really respect, who's now I think maybe influenced some of the guys to come over. Like we look at the novice competition that's coming up here in less than a month, and the vast majority of the list of guys are powerlifters who are coming over and giving it a shot. And we've never seen that before in Manitoba Strongman. We've never seen, like last year it was you and Kelsey. I hope I'm not forgetting anybody that jumped over, but I really don't think that there was anybody else from like that were specifically powerlifters that were coming to try this. Although Kelsey was really both at the same time.
Yeah, she'd only done one. No, Yeah, one powerlifting meet.
Yeah, there you go. Okay, so she might not be the best example of that, but she just did both. And Michelle Kay was somebody who does them all and everything, and Martin and whatever. Oh, Martin, that'd be a good example actually. But you.
And Krista.
There you go. Okay, so there are more than I realized, and I'm sorry about that. But this year we are seeing a huge influx, Lexi, a huge influx of people. I stand by my fucking point here. But we have, I think right now we have in the neighborhood of like 10 to 12 guys, and I think that 2 of them are not powerlifters. Like it's the vast majority of them are powerlifters, and we've seen guys who are new to powerlifting even. Like we saw one of the junior guys sign up, which I'm very excited for. I think that's great that he's testing himself in that way. We see guys like Andrew Langlar who are experienced powerlifters but are not experienced strongmen are giving this a try. And it's just really nice to see guys that are not afraid to just mix it up. You're a guy who I want to get into this a little bit too. Like this last weekend, you did the Voyager Games. I would say just on a way, like there's no way you put that much thought or planning into that, right? Like you just saw something, you gave it a shot, and you enjoyed it. I think, right? Like
yeah,
like, just getting out and trying things. And I think that's something that a lot more people could stand to do. Like that's like me and Dan. If a WRPF meet lines up, we're gonna go do that one too because it's just fun to compete.
Yeah, and especially supporting the people that are putting on these events. Like, I think it's a real shame that we don't see more powerlifters just coming out and watching strongman.
Yeah,
like strongman shows are fun,
right?
Like you get people who have never, well, maybe not never been to a gym, but like you get people who don't lift weights, don't compete. They come out and they watch the strongman shows when they know they're happening because it's entertaining.
It's a spectacle.
Yeah.
I think there's something to that it's just this isn't going to be news. I say this all the time, but I think the MPA people live in a little bit of a bubble sometimes where if it's not like an MPA meet, they just don't really give a shit. And I think that if they gave more of a chance to things like that, they'd be like, oh, this is fun too. And I'm not even saying competing, but just checking it out. You're a guy who watches every strongman competition that's streamed pretty much, like all the big shows and everything, right? Like it's just an entertaining thing, and you're not a guy who's particularly involved with the sport. Obviously you're on the peripherals of it and stuff, but you just enjoy watching it. And I think that if more people who if you enjoy powerlifting, obviously you enjoy a lot of the aspects of strongman. I think they would like it more if they gave it a shot too.
Yeah, I agree. It's never made a lot of sense to me why we don't have a ton of crossover with like the Manitoba strength sports. Now that's starting to happen. Like you said, like more and more powerlifters are signing up for things like the novice show.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's always struck me as quite odd. And like even last year, Anna did the novice show, and then through her, I became more familiar with like the Olympic weightlifting scene here in Manitoba.
Yeah.
I hadn't met a single person in the entire competitive scene in Manitoba weightlifting before I met Anna.
Right. Yeah, and that's weird too. Is that it's very insulated. It was the same thing too when me and Dan and Kelsey went and did the Highland Games last year. They have their own scene there, and I hadn't met a single one of them before. And they're all really nice people and everything. And I told them, I was like, please, like, consider coming out. You know what I mean? Like, or even like the Voyager Games that we went to. I went and watched you guys, and like, there's some guys there who need to be in strength sports. There's some girls there who need to be in strength sports, and they just didn't know about it. It's just interesting how disconnected we like. I like to think that it's like, well, if someone wants to do strongman, they know where to find us, but it's like they don't even necessarily know what strongman is. You know what I mean? Like, it's still we don't have that mainstream like penetration that we want to have. You know what I mean? Where like if I say to a guy like, hey, have you ever thought of strongman? No, I haven't, but I would like to give it a shot. There's lots of times they're still like, what is that? You know, like, they don't know.
And it's crazy that a lot of people at the Voyager Games had no idea when like Jose is such a staple figure.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
I don't think she doesn't try to pull anyone over to anything else. She goes, she enjoys doing this and she enjoys doing this, like the arm wrestling and the Voyager Games and the strongman, but they're all like separate.
Yeah, they're all weird niche things that are challenging in their own ways. Like they're all technical things. They're things that you can just pick up and do, but they're things that you can get much better at if you kind of figure them out a little bit, which she always manages to do.
Yeah.
So Jose Morneau, she's a former World's Strongest Woman competitor. She runs Manitoba Arm Wrestling. She's been to the Arnolds for arm wrestling. She's been to the World Highland Games. I've never asked her, but I have to believe she's a powerlifting background. There's no way she just hasn't tried it. Like
I'm sure.
Yeah, that would strike me as very odd. But she's also she's made it to the finals of the Voyager Games for 30 years. Yeah. She told me 30 years she's been to the finals of the Voyager Games. Like she's just to me, she's like a real strength athlete. You know what I mean? Like she's just somebody that you can, if you compete in weird sports, you see her and you're like, that's a fucking legend of weird sports because she just does it all. And she's great.
A tactician at it too. Like
watching her do the tug of war, which is like okay, so the Voyager games would be a strictly Manitoba thing, right? That's like the Manitoba Métis, right?
So they did go into the history when we were there actually. So it started with like Manitoban like trappers and they would after the end of their season they would meet at I forget what at the time it was Fort something, but it's now Thunder Bay.
Okay.
So that was their big central hub. Their trading post where they would go with all their furs and everything that they collected during the trapping season, and they'd go there and there would be people to sell them to so they can make a living. And when they got back, everyone would all the trappers came back at the same time, and they would have a big celebration. And a lot of the competitions that they do now were part of the celebration. They would have these little competitions, and they would be betting with things like casks of rum and things like that. So the trappers would have an opportunity to win prizes based on their performance in these games that were like basically that they were training for by being trappers.
Right. Which is the interesting thing about it is that it's all on the job stuff for the most part. Not all of it. I guess the wrestling maybe not so much, but they don't leg wrestle too many like bears probably. But what we can't not talk about this because it's such an interesting thing, and like I said, anybody who does weird sports will appreciate this weird sport where we went. Okay, so it was at the Marion Hotel, which is a Métis owned and operated hotel in Winnipeg, Manitoba. It's part of the Festival de Voyageurs, which is a huge annual festival here in Winnipeg and Manitoba. And so there was like a heats that you made your way through, right, to get to the finals. That's correct? So the finals were held on last Saturday, and I went and checked it out. And I was kind of like I had to finish here, and I had to drop the dog off, so I had to rush over there. And I was like, I said I was going to go, so I'm going to go there. And when I got there, it was a fucking blast. It was so fun to watch.
Yeah.
And it made me so... I was just so antsy. I was like, God, I want to fucking compete so badly. Like, I was halfway hoping that they would be like, all right, if anybody wants to come up and try it. But that's kind of how the whole thing starts, I guess. So that doesn't really make sense. But there was just so many of the events that I saw, and I was like, God damn, I really wish I had done this. So next year we're gonna have we have our own fucking the Métis monster Dan Cadger here. So I think we got to get him involved in some capacity.
For this.
Absolutely, yeah. So and I think that he'd be really good at some of those events too.
Absolutely, yeah.
Like there's just some that jump to mind. And I kind of want to go over the events with you, but. It was so fun to watch, and you and Anna did so well too. Especially because it's like it was fun to go there because there's people there where like, oh, this is their thing. Do you know what I mean? Like there's people who wait for the year for Festival and for the Voyager games and stuff, and like there's people who spend all day there at their tables just drinking and eating and having a good time. The people who were competing were all very experienced. They knew their shit. They know techniques. They know maybe little cheats here and there. Like they know all kinds of things to be able to just get the edge. Like it's like someone coming from a background like strongman or whatever can really appreciate that. Where it's like the more you know, the more you can push yourself in that kind of stuff. And so the first one that I missed the first two events, which I was upset about. But the first one was the log, what do you call it? Log saw log.
I think they just call it sawing.
Sawing, which is exactly what it sounds like. It's just you have a bow saw and you have to get through a 4x4.
Yeah,
as fast as you possibly can. You did well in that one.
Yeah, I made it to the final in that one. Least technique, least body weight advantage.
Right.
Event for sure.
And you have a history of doing wood stuff.
Yeah, I used to for 8 years, I think. No, 6 years. I did just a program that I was in, like an after school thing.
Yeah.
We did like an advanced survival training thing where there was like winter camping every year, and it's you spend like a week in it's usually during school spring break, so late February, early March, and up north, so colder than here in Winnipeg.
Yes.
And it's just you live in you're in tents, so that's the comfortable version. And then you eventually graduate to what they call advanced survival habitation. There's actually mini ash, and then you do that 1 year where you have like 2 days to build a lean-to, and then you on the last night you sleep in your lean-to, gather firewood and everything, and then there's ash. So the advanced survival habitation where you you snowshoe it to a place. Then the instructor's like, "Yep, this is good," and then you have one backpack with your clothes in it, and that's it. You make a lean-to. You get all of your own firewood. You got to keep your fire burning throughout the night, and that is a lot of sawing.
Yeah,
you get a saw. They provide you a saw.
Right. So it's you've lived your whole life waiting for this moment of at the Marion Hotel, and you paid off. You did a great job with that one.
Yeah, I didn't do great on Thursday. My technique was not there, but it came back on
Saturday. You just needed that one. If we would have done a log training session here, not that log, but a different a sawing log training session here, you would have been on top of that one. The next one was the leg wrestling one, which I missed that one too. Like what because the leg wrestling didn't go the way you wanted it to. What did you need to be better at it?
Part of it is also growing up north, we did a lot of leg wrestling. So I think I was pretty good at it for that reason. But they did make it more strict. So when I was growing up, it was just flip the other person over. This one, you're not allowed to lock knees.
Okay.
So you lift your leg up. You can't have too much of your calves touching, and you can't lock behind your knees.
Okay.
So you have to lock at the ankles, which part of it is there is a skill to getting someone's ankle, and you want to be pushing down and then also kind of across your own body. Mm-hmm. So you're pulling their leg away from them. And it's really hard because you got to move your leg out to the side to lock the ankle and then pull it in.
Right.
So
it's super technical. It's like it's really challenging to do if you don't know what you're doing.
And if you could think of like a similar movement trying to do with your hand, it would be no problem at all. But you're much less coordinated with your legs,
for sure,
than you are with your hands. So it's like you're concentrating on that, and then there is a pretty big strength component, which I think is why I got as far as I did. And then there's a big body weight component too, which there was maybe one guy in the final who was smaller than me. I would say
they were fucking huge, some of those guys.
Yeah, most of the time I was probably outweighed by at least 40 pounds, I'd say.
Yeah, there was a couple guys that were my height. I think one guy was a little taller than me, and they're the two Bisons players.
Yeah,
and they were huge. Like they were like the one guy must have been 350 if he was a fucking pound.
Oh, yeah, and
the other guy I put him right around 300 too. Like, but a little less fluff on him than the first guy, but very just like his athletic and muscular.
Body.
Yeah,
his lower body was just massive.
Yeah. The next one was the one that I walked in during, which was the tug of war.
Oh, and for leg wrestling, I got eliminated in the semifinal.
Right.
And that'll come back. We'll talk more about that.
Okay.
Well, we'll talk more about the guy who eliminated me.
Yeah. I walked in during the tug of war, which is not what I anticipated a tug of war being. It's not what you might imagine a tug of war. It's certainly not like a traditional one. But you're standing on a barrel. Each of you standing on a barrel with a length of rope between you, and you're pulling the other person off of that. So it has almost nothing to do with strength.
No, the barrel makes the barrel does a couple things. One, it does make it more strategic.
For sure.
But what it really does is make strength a complete non-factor.
Right.
Like it doesn't matter how hard you can pull, because if you pull as hard as you can, you're just going to pull yourself over.
Right.
So, strength is almost a non-issue, and then it makes body weight matter a lot. Obviously, body weight's already going to be important in a tug of war, but with the barrel, like the heavier you are, the less likely the barrel is going to tip. Mm-hmm. So I was up against the same guy who eliminated me in the leg wrestling for that one, and after the last event, he told me that he's been doing it for 17 years and he won 2 years ago.
Nice.
Which is kind of another key thing about these games. If you win, you aren't allowed to compete the next year.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
But there's no defending of your title the next year. That's weird.
No. Guess they just want
fresh faces.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Good way to get more people involved.
I guess so, yeah. Yeah, you don't have the one guy dominating throughout the whole thing, I guess.
Yeah, and so when I pulled, and if you have somebody who doesn't know the strategy, then all of that body weight advantage can be overcome by knowing good enough strategy.
Because they'll let slack go of the rope. Like they'll try to give up some of the rope in the interest of getting somebody to fall, which is obviously like a bit of a gamble because then you're giving up some of the rope to the person. But that's how Jose beat a much bigger woman than her, was just let it go for a second and the person just fell backwards and then that was it.
Yeah, so people will often like lean into the rope to try to pull you over, and if you let go at the right time, they lean too far back and they fall off the barrel. But if somebody has at least decent knowledge of the strategy and they have a big size advantage, then they don't have to lean back to pull you. They can just pull with their arms.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you resist the pull with your arms, you're pulling yourself over.
Right.
But if you give slack, they're not leaning back.
Right. Yeah.
So
it's a really fucking crazy event.
So as long as they know not to lean into it, then there's nothing that you can do to overcome the size disadvantage. But you do have, bigger people who are just planning on muscling the rope away from you, and they'll lean into it. That's what happened with Jose. She was against a more novice competitor, despite probably not needing to because of the difference in size between her and Jose. She leaned into the pull. Jose let go. She falls over.
Right.
But if she had even decent knowledge of the strategy, if she just pulled with her arms and didn't lean forward or back,
right,
there'd be
just
nothing
she could do about it. Yeah, that was a big, strong woman that she was against in that one. Following that was the Voyager wrestling. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. Can you explain that a little bit?
That one's a tough one to explain. So your feet have to stay planted. Your left foot can it has to stay in contact with the ground, but like you can lift your toe up, you can lift your heel up. It just has to be touching the ground. Your right foot is going to be butted up against your opponent, and it has to stay completely flat on the floor. You can't move your right foot at all. And then you're locked in a handshake. And then from there, you just got to get the other person to either fall down or move their feet. So you're side to side, and with that one, again, body weight matters. There is more strategy than it would really seem, and strength is a big component. In that one, I ended up being in the first group to go up, which happened the same thing on Thursday.
Yeah.
Which is my qualification day. And I was up against, again, the guy who won 2 years ago and has done this for 17 years. He had the trick. He put my hand behind my back, right? Yeah. When we were still setting up. Okay? And I was like, oh, well, we're going to get centered. And then before they give us the go, and they just said go. And I was like, oh, I can't pull at all back here.
Nothing to do from there.
So he just threw me to the ground. There was I couldn't offer any resistance.
Right.
So yeah, for that one, the strategy starts before they say go.
Right. Absolutely.
That's just like, I just didn't know that. I didn't know the cheats when in the qualification day. I was also up against somebody who didn't really know
because they wouldn't know either, right? Yeah.
Yeah, but he was again just bigger than me, out-muscled me. Neither of us really knew what we were doing, but I picked the wrong strategy that time, and then didn't get to learn about what somebody good would actually do.
Right.
And it ended up kind of biting me both times. But
well, that's the sport, I guess. The sport of the Voyager games.
Yeah, and I guess a reoccurring theme here that we should probably address is or probably bring up the start order, like who you're matched up against, is entirely just random draw.
Okay.
You just draw numbers. Number 1 faces number 2, number 3 faces number 4, and all the numbers for every event is drawn before the game start.
Right.
So I happened to get matched up with the same guy in the first round for each of the last 3 events.
And that was the guy who'd won.
That was the guy who won, yeah.
Not the best luck on that one.
No.
The last one was, and I said this to you several times now, but the one that's really poorly named, because it does not do it justice to how challenging and also like potentially like fucking painful it is the pillow fight.
Yeah.
So which is okay. So explain what the pillow fight is so that they can understand that it's not just you guys whomping each other with like feather pillows.
Yeah. So they're like sacks. They look like the sacks that you fill for like sandbags, like flooding and stuff. I don't know. They're probably like 7 to 10 pounds, I would guess. Probably on the lower end of that, 7 or 8 pounds. They're really stiff.
Yeah, they looked like they would hurt. Like,
yeah, like
if someone hits them hard enough in the back, in like the stomach or in the side, you're gonna probably get a little bit of a shot in the gut.
Yeah, they have give. Like there's cushioning in there, but like you can one of the rules is you can't use it to balance. Like you could lean over, put all of your weight on it, and it's not going to compress to the point where you're going to like, you know, like a pillow would, right?
Right.
And then you're standing on a 4x4. You have a line that you have to be behind at the start. Your opponent has a line that they have to be behind. Once it starts, you can cross your line, but you can't cross your opponent's line, and you just got to knock them off.
Right.
Any foot touches the ground off of the 4x4, and it's a best of 3, so that would be 1 point to the person whose foot didn't move.
Right.
And yeah, and like tons of balance. Weight does matter because it's harder to move a larger object. And we've seen that with against a couple of those Bison's guys, particularly
they just hunkered
the guy
down.
who won the overall. Yeah. He just ate shot after shot after shot until his opponent was like, oh, he's just not going to throw back, and then just got off their guard and hit them once, and they'd fall over because they got out of their. If you stay low, it's much easier to stay balanced. So you're crouching down the whole time. So he just hunkered down in like a half squat, and
both those guys just based, and there was nowhere you could.
No.
There's very little you could do about it once they were down there like that. 2 football players like that, like university level football players, they're going to be sturdy.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, absolutely. And like, and then as soon as the opponent decided like to just swing for the fences and like hit over and over, they would gradually they'd stand up out of their squat just because they're not paying attention to it.
Right.
And then you just like, oh, you stood up, boom.
And then just wait for it, and just like one shot usually would take the guy off. And yeah, it was very impressive to watch. And like I said, like the pillow fight ended up being probably one of the more exciting events because it lasted longer than some of them. Like the tug of war lasted a little while.
Best 2 or 3, yeah.
Yeah, and there ended up being some of them were a little bit of a thrill ride. Like the way that you'd see guys like absorb and miss and feint and duck shots and stuff. It was actually pretty fun to watch. The whole thing was really a blast, and if you've never checked it out before, I really can't recommend enough that if you're any kind of a fan of like, I mean, I don't know, anything, whatever, niche sports, like just but if you're
a fun community, too.
Yeah, and I think that's the part that I really want to stress too is that like everyone there was just having so much fucking fun. The people who were watching, the people who were competing, like everyone was just having a fucking blast. And if you get a chance to check that out next year, I really strongly recommend it. And we're gonna have a group of guys and girls there, hopefully, who can do some damage when we show up there next time. So, okay, we're at, let me check my time here. Oh, shit. Which of the 2 subjects do you think would be the quickest for you to be able to get over?
The fact that, like, a lot of people trying to be successful strength athletes just are not big enough.
Yes.
And so I want to approach this, like, there's a few different perspectives here, and I'm not doing this, like, I think it just raised the discussion. I'm not saying anything about like the guy who brought that up. There are individual contexts where it does really matter to stay at a certain.
I'll do the picking on of small guys. You just you work purely with the facts, and I'll work purely with the emotions of it.
Yeah. So first off, I want to address some individual context here. Like, we're not talking about if you find that my quality of life goes to shit after I hit like a certain body weight. Mostly, I think that if that isn't just because of getting too fat, which isn't something I'm not going to be talking about, getting to, nobody's saying that like Pat should be over 300 pounds.
No.
I'm mostly going to come at this from the perspective I'm like, obviously I'm more in the powerlifting world. Powerlifting is a much simpler sport too, less physiological demands to keep track of, because even as you get stronger, you might get, your conditioning might take a hit, right? So that obviously matters a lot more for strongman than powerlifting. But there's a lot of individual context that you just can't cover, like sleep apnea after you get to a certain size. If you just generally feel like shit, if your conditioning is going down, like that is all individual specific.
Right.
Obviously I don't know him personally, but Pavlo Nakonechny is huge. He is not fat.
Right.
He's like 300 right now he's much smaller because he was in a car accident. And he's making his way back. But when he was at his peak for strongman, he's 380 pounds, like 6'5", with very clear abs. He looks like he's 12 weeks away from a bodybuilding.
I mean,
show.
Thor was 420 pounds with abs too at one point. You know what I mean? Like you can be really huge and have low body fat too. Not that we're all going to be fucking Thor or Pavlo, but
yeah, and neither of those guys you would say, oh well, his conditioning sucks.
Right.
Like obviously it probably isn't as good as like a guy at 231, but then they're also lifting heavier weights. So,
right. Yeah.
It's obviously individual specific, and other guys, Kevin Ferris says he doesn't like being over 290, and he's a guy where that isn't because he's getting fat. Like that dude is shredded.
Yeah, he looks great at all times. Yeah.
So yeah, there's a ton of individual context here. We can't talk about all of it, or like, I don't think you could even have an informed idea on the physiology as to why. Like, we're not getting these people in labs. Like Thor has never been part of a research study where they put him in a metabolic ward for, 2 weeks and had him do like nothing just so they can see, how like and measure every physiological parameter that we'd like to see about like how does his body just work.
Right.
So this is to say, if you're like, we're talking about getting as big as you can. Okay. And a lot of people aren't doing that. Right. So, additionally, within the realm of strongman, I do want to talk about some historical context here, because another way that you've mentioned on the podcast about competing in heavier weight classes, and I've had this discussion with some of the strongman community here, is competing up a category, and that doesn't mean that you have to weigh that category.
Right.
Like you and I have talked about, like the 120s. No offense to any 120 competitors, it doesn't really make sense. You're lifting the same weights as the open.
Right. I wish it was structured differently.
Yeah. If maybe you just bumped up the open weights, the same like 10% or whatever jumps that every other weight class does, like it would be justifiable. But right now, the way that it's currently structured, you're lifting the same weights. The only thing is that you're just not comparing yourselves to the open.
Right.
And to me, looking at that, like, it's kind of just avoiding that challenge.
Yes.
So, and I think that runs counter to the historical context of strongman. Because as I want to say most seasoned competitors know, strongman really started with like the vaudeville era, like circus acts.
The circus sideshow shit. Yeah.
Yeah. And a big part of those shows too was just be big and strong. Right?
Yeah.
Like that was part of the spectacle.
It was the visuals of it was really important too.
Yeah.
Like looking the part.
Yeah, and drawing in a crowd, lifting those like big globes, which is like the reason why World's Strongest Man uses the globe barbells and stuff. Like that's still around, and I think it is important to understand the historical context of the sport, because if you're and again, not throwing shade at the guy, but if you're criticizing the ideas of people heavily involved in the sport, those people, they're carrying through these ideas. They're standing on the shoulders of the people who built the sport up, right?
Right.
So in a way, it is counter to the existing culture of the sport, and that's not always necessarily. It's not always a bad thing to run counter to the existing culture. There's a lot of times where existing cultures are really dumb, like the idea that you have to be like super small in gymnastics and promotion of eating disorders and stuff. Like cultures aren't infallible, but I think in this case, it's only a positive when you're like, I'm willing to take on all challengers. And that was another part of what was integral to the circus shows.
Mic a little closer to your mouth.
Is that when strongmen came to a town, it was, hey, can anyone else do this?
Right.
And anybody from the audience could come up and try to lift that weight. And like a lot of the weights were probably exaggerated from this era, but it was still impressive as fuck, because you knew that nobody else was showing up and lifting those weights.
Right.
Okay. And there's stories of strongmen going to other strongmen shows. And so one person who perfectly fits this mold of you don't have to match somebody size for size to compete against them, is the most famous of these strongmen and the first ever fitness grifter, Eugene Sandow.
Right.
Okay. I looked for how heavy Eugene Sandow weighs, and it's like there's like no reliable sources on this, which really surprised me, because they were so obsessed with people's like measurements and stuff.
Right.
But like he's probably like, I wouldn't put him over 220.
That's kind of what I had him at, would be like the low end of 220 to 230 ish. Yeah. Or sorry, low end of 200.
Yeah, he was also only 5'9".
Just a baby.
So, yeah, he wasn't like he wasn't even a big guy. Like,
no. Like if you walk down the street, you wouldn't like marvel at him or anything. Like
no, not if he was wearing a shirt anymore.
No, yeah.
Most perfectly built man.
Yeah, absolutely. A beautiful man.
So like he accepted challengers from all of the heavier strongmen as well. Like some of the most notables from the day, and got names that you probably recognize now. It probably also partly because most of them are plays on historical figures. Like there Samson. There were two brothers. I forget what one of them went by. The other one was Hercules. And Cyclops, right? Were all their stage names. But this does kind of fall on its face because Eugene Sandow did not ever compete against Louis Cyr. And Louis Cyr tried so hard to get Eugene Sandow to compete against him. Him and the article I was reading, it was like a newspaper clipping. It referred to him, I think, as his agent, but it was probably like the guy who ran the circus that Louis Cyr was affiliated with.
Yeah.
They showed up in disguises to one of Sandow's performances, and when Sandow gave the typical challenge of X prize to whoever can lift this weight, Louis Cyr walked out of the crowd wearing a big trench coat and threw it off, and then challenged Sandow to a weightlifting competition.
And he would have been a lot bigger than Sandow too. Like it would have been like visually very striking when he walked out there too.
Yeah, Cyr was like 340 to 360.
For anybody who's not familiar, which you should be, Louis Cyr was a French Canadian strongman who, like the reason they call Quebec the cradle of strongman is because of Louis Cyr.
Yeah, and absolutely historic lifts that would be competitive in pro strongman nowadays, and like actual in large part like verified ones. Olympic lifting was still a sport back then, and a lot of these strongmen did it, right? So like you can look at his like legitimate verified numbers, and a lot of them would be competitive in today's strongman. And like there's a reason that we have the Louis Cyr dumbbell or the Cyr dumbbell, right? And like his number, he hit 273 pounds allegedly. Again, we don't always know, but like that would absolutely be competitive today
for sure.
In World's Strongest Man. And this is in the 1800s. He was natty.
He's natty. We know that for a fact that he was natty. Yeah.
He died before steroids were invented. So yeah. Lastly, next part I want to talk about, and this is obviously the part where I'm gonna get most into the nitty gritty here, is so I want to talk about the actual like performance expectation from changing weight classes. And this is going to be from the perspective of you want to be as big as possible while staying relatively lean.
Okay. Right? So we're not talking about like necessarily an open weight competitor here who's just going for big at all costs here.
Not necessarily.
Okay.
There are tons of other factors that start to play into that. Like that is again just going to be too individual to really say.
Right.
Because when you're gaining weight faster than you're actually just gaining muscle, aka you're putting on fat, right? A lot of the added benefit or the added strength comes from changes in leverages, and mostly changes in leverages.
But you can't contract it or use
more
it.
Stable, but yeah, fat isn't a contractile tissue,
right?
So, so this is coming from the perspective of, even though I know people are going to roll their eyes at this, but theoretically maximizing your relative strength. So like your GL points or your dots or Wilks, whatever score you want to use.
Yep.
So the first bit is, because we're just talking about like getting muscle size for this. A lot of people, and I think especially in the lower weight classes, I think have a belief that the neural adaptations, so just what happens in your nervous system, will be enough to keep them competitive. And I really don't think that's the case. And part of it might be just we got to define neural adaptations. Okay. So when I'm talking neural adaptations here, I mean motor unit recruitment and firing rates.
Okay.
So the more motor units recruit, the heavier weight you can lift. So the more motor units you recruit, the more weight you can lift. And then motor unit firing rate determines how hard a given motor unit is going to contract. If you have a higher firing rate, you have a harder contraction, you produce more force, you can lift more weight. And really, in simple movements, that doesn't change with training, which was surprising for me to learn, because that's kind of one of the, I think even when if you're looking into science-based fitness content as a, relative, not like a science-curious novice, that is one of the things that you hear. You learn about motor units, you learn about like type 1 and type 2 muscle fibers, and you learn about like motor unit firing rate increases. I did anyway. I don't know. Maybe I'm the only one.
I did not learn about that, but okay, go on.
I also one of my first exposures was Poliquin to fitness content. A lot of his writings, while they were in a lot of cases just used to sell his supplements, a lot of his stuff on training or his programs was geared to like that science crowd, and he did have a lot of the would talk about physiological principles quite often that are accurate, right? So one study in particular, it had trained and untrained lifters. Trained was defined as having 6 years of experience, perform an isometric bicep curl, so maximal effort isometric, and they used high density EMG. That is an array of electrodes, so it'd be like a patch that you'd put onto your bicep, and using that and like a bunch of algorithms that I don't understand because I'm not a computer programmer, it can model the actual activation of individual muscle fibers. So they use that, put it on, again, measured trained versus untrained, and in an isometric test, which means that there's no skill component, there's no motor control necessary, there was no difference in motor unit recruitment or firing rate. Now, that isn't to say that in complex movements that isn't the case.
Right.
But it's not an inherent part of just being trained.
It's not a given.
And yeah, like there are other factors, antagonist coactivation, which we'll talk about in a second, changes, and then motor control. So motor control is, I think, what most people are talking about when they say neural adaptations, but it's just your technique gets better.
Right.
Okay? And your ability to push harder in a movement or stay over a more stable base of support, all that is changing as you learn a movement. And that's why novices can get better from one set to the next.
Right.
There's no changes happening in your nervous system during that. You're literally just like, your body is figuring out, oh, when I did it this way, it moved better than when I did it that way.
Right, you're just getting it.
Yeah. So motor control definitely does change, but motor control is also pretty finite. Like, my technique has, well, except for intentional changes of like stance width and stuff, my technique in most lifts has not changed for years. Okay. So if your technique isn't changing because you've been doing this long enough, without intentional changes, like if you're not learning how to do it better,
right?
Okay, and neural adaptations have stopped or aren't even that big of a magnitude to begin with, all you got left is gaining muscle.
Right.
Okay. So if you were to be up against competitors who were, so if you were, let's say, 83 kilo lifter, that would be a big weight cut for you.
That would be very significant, but yes, let's imagine that.
So yeah, if you're an 83 kilo lifter, most top level 83 kilo lifters are like 5'6", maybe 5'7".
Mm-hmm.
Okay. If you're 5% taller than them, then you're going to be 5'9". I know local 83 kilo lifters that are much taller than 5'9".
Right.
Okay. Actually, I think one of the people I'm thinking of, I think he competed as a 74 this past provincials, and he's like 5'11", maybe 6 feet.
Wow, that is skinny.
That is skinny, yeah. And he's been competing probably since 2017, 2018.
Wow.
Competing in powerlifting, not just training either. So yeah, if you are, we assume all of your proportions are the same, so there's no leverage advantages. Everything's the same. We basically just take a person, we scale them up 5%. You now have 5% longer moment arms. So if we just picture a bicep curl again, if your forearm's 5% longer, distance from the dumbbell to where the bicep is applying force on your forearm is 5% longer. That means to lift the same weight, you have to produce 5% more force in the muscle.
Right.
So if we take that to be a deadlift, for the same amount of muscular force, your opponents, they can deadlift 525, you can deadlift 500.
Right.
Okay? But that extra 5% in height isn't free. For every relative change in length, the relative change in mass is cubed. Okay? Because mass is related to volume. Volume is a 3-dimensional measurement. Okay? So if you're 5% longer, you're 15.8% heavier.
Okay.
So you can't be 15.8% heavier because you're in the 83 kilo weight class.
Right. So you put that limit on yourself by restricting your weight gain.
Yeah. So you have to, again, this is coming from the perspective of you are staying relatively lean as your best performance will allow. That's, again, going to change depending on upon the lifter. Most powerlifters, that's probably put them somewhere between 10 and 15%. So we'll say you're as lean as your best performance will allow. You can't get leaner. You can't just be heavier. And you can't preferentially lose bone or organ mass.
Right.
So your only option is to have less muscle. So you need to produce more force while having less muscle.
Right.
And muscle force is directly proportional to muscle cross-sectional area. So if you are if you are 5% taller, I want to say 15. I was getting my numbers mixed up. It's a lot to hold in the memory. So if you're 5% taller, you now are going to be lifting 5% less weight.
Right.
For the same skill, same muscle mass, but you're not going to have the same muscle mass. So you're going to be losing 15% of 83 kilos. It's like 8 kilos of muscle that you can't have.
It's wild to hear it put into a number like that, where I think that if a lot of people have never really conceptualized it like that. Where it's imagine if you were 8 kilos of muscle heavier or smaller, heavier or lighter, how big of a change that would make in your body. It's pretty wild.
Yeah, and so that means that a taller lifter is going to be at a disadvantage, but it doesn't necessarily tell us that gaining weight is the solution yet. So the last bit that I want to say on this, as far as the numbers and this more theoretical part of the conversation, if you have, and this one I am going to be referring to what I have written down because I'm not going to be able to remember all these numbers off the top of my head. Okay.
So get your pens and paper.
I'll do the math for you guys. It's okay.
Okay.
So I want to talk about how it would affect relative strength at this point.
Okay.
So if we have a 90 kilo lifter, and this lifter has 45 kilograms of lean muscle mass, okay, and they're totaling 765, that means that they're lifting 17 kilograms per kilogram of muscle. And that's within the realm of possibility out of what we have measured in research. That would give them a DOTS of 494.65. If the lifter decided that they could cut 3 kilograms, so they're currently walking around at 90, they're competing at 90, they decide, I'm good with water cutting 3 kilograms. So I'm going to gain 3 kilograms, and we'll assume that it's just muscle. Okay. Staying at that 17 kilograms lifted per kilogram of muscle would now put their total at 816 at 93 kilograms. And that gives them a DOTS of 519. And then, their goal is to then cut back down to 90 kilograms assuming they maintain their strength, which at that small of a cut, I don't see why they wouldn't, they would end up with a DOTS of 527. So they went from 495 to 527 by gaining 3 kilograms of muscle. And again, so I'm using the just the weight as a representation of how much stronger they would get. But again, when you have technique changes or proficiency and neurological proficiency constant, which in an experienced lifter, those would be constant, then the number one factor influencing strength gains is muscle cross-sectional area. So, well, again, area isn't also the same thing as volume. So it's not a perfect one-for-one comparison.
Okay.
If Jeremy listens to this, he might get really upset. The one person I trust listens to this that knows math better than me. Yeah. But I think it is a close enough representation of what we do actually tend to see in people who gain size. I went from 202 to 231, and my GL points went from, I believe, 81 to 90. Okay. And then I cut down to 93, but that was after gaining a bunch more muscle and then doing the cut,
right,
where I probably still had more muscle at 93 than I did at 105, or pretty close to, and my GL points went up another 4. But I'm fully anticipating after I get back up to 231, my GL points will take another pretty large jump, especially, again, ideally staying very lean.
Right. I think that's what you're saying too is an important part of it too, though, is that, like, and we talked about earlier with Pavlo and Thor and stuff, but like, gaining weight is not getting fat. And you said that earlier, but I really want to stress that, is that, like, I think when people, when the smaller powerlifters or the lighter strongman guys imagine it, is that, well, I don't want to look like, Tyler or Jeffers, or I don't want to look like these big fat guys. And it's like, that's not what anybody's saying. And we're also, when it's important to note that getting heavier does not mean necessarily going into the open division. You know what I mean? Like, that's like, there's 3 classes above 80 before you get into the open division. Like, you can fill it a little bit and go into the next one and see how you feel comfortable in that one for a while before you feel like you have to be married to one division or feel like you have to jump all the way to open for whatever reason, which I also do encourage doing. But if that's not in the cards for you, it's not in the cards for you.
But go where you're competitive.
Right.
Like, push yourself. Don't avoid competition. Like, that again plays back into, like, the historical context.
Right.
Like, it's pretty much an antithesis to the origination of strongman as a sport to avoid competition.
Right.
In any way.
That's something too, is that I think that you could look at, like you said, if you're a guy who's barely into the 105s, let's say, and you like, well, there's 10 guys in the 105s, but I could cut down to the 90 and beat the 2 guys that are down there. It's like, but why would you do that? Like, what's the point? Like, where's the competitive spirit in that? And also, like, the whole thing about this sport, I think people tend to lose, and I'm speaking about strongman right now, is that people think that they forget that we're supposed to do this because we like to do it. It's supposed to be a fun thing to do. Ultimately, unless you're competing at the very, very highest level, this is all a hobby for all of us. Mm-hmm. And if you're somebody who's just like, I want to go where I can win, it's like, well, you've lost the plot then at that point. You're not doing this for the right reasons anymore. It's supposed to be compete and be against other people and test yourself against other people, whatever weight category that might put you in.
Yeah, absolutely. And the speaking of, competitiveness, placings, challenging yourself, that is actually I was going to skip this because I was like, this is running. This was supposed to be like the shortest section of what I had prepared, and I was like, oh, this is running kind of long. I'm gonna skip the last bit. Instead, I will try to filter it, because there is one study that looked at weight class changes and their effect on competitiveness directly, as in like number or like as in placings. Unfortunately, it was in powerlifters and Olympic weightlifters, and they didn't separate out for the weight class changes between the 2 sports. So these were only international level athletes.
Okay.
World championships for both sports, and then Olympics for Olympic weightlifting. They looked at athletes who had changed weight classes and how their competition results changed. And I wanted to bring this up because it is a counterpoint, and I always like to even if I'm trying to disprove myself, it's always good practice, right?
Right.
So this study found that when athletes move down a weight class, they improve their competitive placing by 3 places. When they moved up a weight class, they improved competitive placings by 1. Okay? So also, I should say, it was only the men moving down that improved their competitive placing by 3. Every other analysis improved by 1. So women moving down improved by 1. Men moving up improved by 1. Women moving up improved by 1.
Okay.
And so, not that I actually anticipated somebody bringing this up, but so this study is Skoberg. I don't know if I'm saying that right. It's Swedish. And what I wanted to point out is, like, I don't think you can put much stock into the experiences of elite athletes changing weight classes. So, one, they were able to do that. Now, if we just assume that this trend is true for powerlifting as well as it is for Olympic weightlifting, then those athletes that moved down, they were able to move down. Either they were moving from like a very heavy weight class where they weren't able to stay lean while filling out the weight class, so they had extra or excess body fat to lose, or they just hadn't filled out their weight class to begin with. Okay, but that again isn't what I was talking about. And again, they're elite level athletes. I doubt that they spent a year not training to lose muscle to move down a weight class.
Right.
They had to have been able to make that weight class.
Right.
So additionally, they didn't separate by sport. Like I said, Olympic weightlifting is much more technical, much more reliant on explosive power, not just force generating capabilities. So if it was a disproportionate amount of Olympic weightlifters who moved down, that could definitely skew the results. And athletes may be switching due to strategic reasons, which we just talked about, which is why I decided to bring this up. If you're competing at a world championships, there is no getting away from competition.
Right.
So I don't mind if athletes are trying to cut into a less competitive category because they're all competitive.
Right.
You're still testing yourself.
Right.
You're adding a strategic element to the sport. You're making a gamble that may or may not pay off. Moving into a category that doesn't have any other competitors is not a gamble.
No.
So I don't think the same intrinsic value to the sport is still there. You're still competing, you're still testing yourself. But yeah, like when it comes to a local level, like if you're not competing against somebody, why are you competing?
Well, and to put sort of like a face on that, like Mama, like Anna Deloli, she is it's 64, right? That's the weight class?
Yeah.
She's a 64 competitor, but there's nobody to compete against. There's nobody like provincially except for her in the weight class. Even at a national level, there was 2 of them. There should have been a third, but one was injured. So let's say even on the best day, there's 3 of them. So she has recently entered into the Masters division, and despite the fact that there's no weight classes in the women's Masters division, it's just open. She's going to compete as a Masters because she wants to compete against people, and there's so much more to, like, even when I say compete against people, I should maybe rephrase that as compete with people.
Yeah.
She's competing in a community of people that are also lifting and also doing the same things as her. Obviously, when she competes in the 64, to pick some of the Masters women, like, say, Jocelyn or Muriel or whatever, they're going to watch her. They're going to cheer her on. But it's not the same as when they're all in the same division competing against each other, with each other, whatever. And I'm really excited that Mama's she decided, yep, I'll not care about my weight class anymore now, and I'll just get to go to where I can compete against some more people. And I think that's like that really encapsulates kind of what we're talking about here, which is like if you're talking about at a world level where this is like a big fucking deal. That's one thing. But if we're talking about just like a hobby competition that we're having to have fun and to experience the thrill of competing at whatever level it might be, like, make it fun for yourself. Yeah. Make it something that you can enjoy and can appreciate and look back on and not be like, well, I was by myself. And why would it was gotta be the worst feeling in the world to be like, Well, yeah, I got first place. Well, how many was there? Well, there was 2, but I did get first place. It's like, how many powerlifters have to do that all the fucking time? And it's like you can remove that to be like, oh, I got 4th out of 8. Well, that's way better in my mind than getting 1st out of 2. I think that means a lot more, to be honest with you. And I think that we could all stand to take a page out of Mama's book when it comes to that kind of stuff.
And so you mentioned that happens in powerlifting all the time, and I'm pretty sure you've seen my eyes roll a bit. Like without naming names, the reigning Manitoba Male Lifter of the Year. And this is one of the things, and so I'm bringing up him because that's an example that we've talked about in the past. But look through a powerlifter's meet recap.
Right.
If they didn't include what placing they got out of however many competitors,
it's probably a reason.
Probably a reason. So like I think even when I posted about the Voyager games, I put that I got bottom half out of 16. I don't know what my actual score was. I got eliminated a bunch of times in the first round. I was probably bottom half. So like, put however many it's out of, because when they were going over the accolades in the AGM, it was, a silver medal at nationals, 2 bronze medals at nationals. It was a bronze or 2 bronze at Commonwealths. And then you go and you look at the result sheet, and the lifter had beaten 1 person out of 3 total competitions, and competing both equipped bench only, raw bench only. Beat 1 guy. He beat him twice, once in 3 lift, once in bench only, out of what you could say is 8 separate competitions.
Right.
So it was framed as 2 bronze medals and 2 silver medals and 2 fourth place medals, 2 fourth places, when you could also phrase it as, last, second last.
See, it's funny because, okay, so when I was wrestling more and we were traveling a lot, one side of me kind of wants to to understand that in a way where a guy that I used to travel with a lot, he's been wrestling for a long time, and he's made a living at it for a long time. So let's say we went to I don't know, buttfuck, North Dakota. I remember what the town was called, but it was a very, very small town in North Dakota.
I think that's the actual name.
Yeah, that might be what it was called. And we wrestled at this. It was like a hotel that booked the show, and I think we wrestled in front of probably 40 people. There was nobody there. It was a very, very poorly attended show. And so my friend who I was traveling with, he wrestled in the main event, and he beat their champion for the title and whatever. So as we were leaving, I
never went back.
Yeah, and we never did. We never did. And as we were leaving, I was like, man, like that fucking sucks and whatever. It's like, I was like, you can't even talk about a show like this. And he's like, what are you talking about? And I was like, well, what are you going to say? Like, I wrestled in front of fucking 40 people in North Dakota. And he's going to say, well, I'll tell you what I'm going to say is that I, in front of a raucous crowd in North Dakota, defeated their champion to win their heavyweight title and blah, blah, blah. And he's like, you don't mention the numbers. And I think of that a lot with the powerlifting stuff too, where I was like, I kind of get it, because in one aspect it makes it look, it's good to look good. It's good to look that we we have all these people that are doing great. And it makes people maybe more interested in trying it if they see people doing well. But then on the other side of it is that there's a little bit of deception there, I think, in that too, in not being entirely honest about how competitive your division was or whatever it might have been. Let's look at the time here. Holy smokes, we've gone long. Okay, so. This was scratching the surface of what we want to go over with Thrones here. We're gonna have Thrones back on in after the Arnolds, which is coming up this weekend, which we're gonna have lots to talk about next week with that. So in the next few weeks, we're gonna have Thrones back on again. I know that you want to talk water cuts, which I'm very excited to get that out there, because I think there's a lot of people in Manitoba who have a lot of learning to do when it comes to water cuts. So that will be a very important episode for them.
That one's gonna be probably even more science heavy. That'll probably be an even drier episode.
Okay. we'll make sure Devin's gone for that one too then. And
he could add some humor into it. That might be smart. I'll get this guy off the mic for a second, get Devin's input.
We will we'll also get to some. I also like to do a Q&A, because I know a lot of people really did have a lot of and I didn't get a chance to put up in time, and I knew that Thrones would have a lot to talk about on his own, but we a lot of people have a lot of questions for Thrones, and he's one of Manitoba's best minds when it comes to lifting, and he's math moves mass, and he's all that shit. So before this fucking camera dies on us again, I'm going to wrap up here for a little bit. We have the Arnolds this weekend with weekend. I don't know why I said that like I'm fucking JF Caron, but we're going to Columbus, Ohio, where Dan Cadger and Patrick Gregor will both be competing, both of our Manitoba competitors. There's a few more from Canada that are going down there. We're very excited to see how everybody does. So wish them luck, send them a message. When we come back, we have the log competition on March 16th right here at Iron Edge Gym. We've seen an awesome amount of donations for that. Like, I could not be any happier with the donations. I'm so thrilled about that. But we're not seeing enough lifters yet. We have less than last year right now, and we have more money raised, but we have less lifters, and I want to see more lifters. April 6th, we have our novice competition. We're so close to tying the number right now to the number of lifters that we had last year, which was like, I think 28, which is awesome for a novice competition like that. We have 2 teams, which you never had before, competing. We want a few more women. We want a few more men. So if you haven't signed up yet, please get signed up. On May 25th, we have Tolstoy, which is our first SCC qualifier. Remember, if you want to do provincials, if you want to do nationals, you got to do the qualifiers. And Tolstoy is always a good time, so come up for that one. June 8th, we have Manitoba's Strongest Man and Woman, which is going to be an awesome show in Morris. You were at the Morris one last time, right?
No, I was at a wedding.
Damn it. Well, it was awesome, and it was really, really fun. It was a great crowd, and we're really looking forward to having that one. And then July 1st is Vita, the other qualifier for provincials. So get signed up for any of those. I think the registration is only open for as far as Tolstoy right now, but get signed up for the log, for the novice competition. If you have any questions with that, please hit me, Strong and Petty, Training Grounds, Iron Age, Devin Penner. There's so many options. Thanks, guys, very much, and we'll see you. Thanks to Thrones. Thank you for coming in. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
There's Blake walking in the background. And we'll see you guys next week after the Arnolds. Thanks, guys.